Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Fandom. And today I am joined by somebody that you may or may not have seen in the background of one of your favorite TV shows. Her name is Christine Caccipuoti. She is also the assistant producer of the podcast known as Footnoting History. And I am proud to have her on the podcast today. How are you doing, Christine?
I am really great. I'm very excited to be here, which I'm sure most people say, but I really mean it.
I really mean it too. Number one, I'm always happy when anybody is
Right.
giving me their time to come to talk to me on my little thing that I do here. But I
Not a
really
little
like
thing,
it.
though. You hit 3 years. It's a big thing.
It's a thing. I'll go with this. It's a thing, and I liked it.
Every year that you avoid the podcast graveyard is a major success, and you should celebrate.
I think I saw something posted today, and we're recording on June 13th here, that there was something like almost 1 million podcasts listed on iTunes, but only 30% of them are active.
Yeah.
So
It's
that's a lot of just like podcasts just sitting there.
yeah, it's kind of sad. Keep being one of the ones that's going. Those are the important things. Half the struggle is just continuing,
That is definitely the struggle. I mean, I took a good solid 3.5 month break earlier this year. So
You gotta do it. We're on our hiatus this month, so I totally get it. We need our month hiatus every year to kind of regroup and refresh and make sure we don't burn out.
exactly. And that was my thing. Like last year in June, I put out almost like 40 episodes in 1 month. And I was like, okay, that's not happening again. And now I'm kind of just like looking over at waveforms every day.
Yeah, we started off our first first 2 years, I think it was, we were every week. And then we were just like, this is not sustainable with what we do. And so now we're every other week and everybody's kind of a lot happier.
That is a good thing. So you and I met on the internet because of me having Emily Prokop on the podcast about a month ago, give or take.
Yes, absolutely. I love her. I'm actually seeing her in a couple of weeks. I'm very excited because we've never really talked in the real life flesh person. It's been sort of like a podcaster internet communication.
Yeah, it's always something. It's the same way with me. Most of my communication is on Twitter or on Facebook.
Yep.
And I've been lucky enough that I've had a few people that I've recorded with. I've got to meet them at like conventions in the area, and I'm like, that's pretty cool. Meeting people that I've talked to, and we have this like thing, this vibe of, hey, we talk together.
Yeah, it's like, I actually know you already.
Right, exactly. But you jumped in, I think, when I was promoting the episode, and you started following me, and I was following you, and then it's like, oh my gosh, you have some really cool fandom stuff that you are.
I got really excited because I was like, somebody who just focuses on fandom. Everybody should be fans of things all the time. Like, it makes me. I knew this girl one time who told me that she was too old to ever wear a graphic T-shirt, and I was just like, don't you love things? Like, don't you want people to know that you love them? Like, that's my mentality. So I was really excited about what you do because it's kind of like, I wish more people just talked about things that they loved all the time or show that they love them. So I got really excited.
That's one of the things that I love is I was walking down the street the other day I was wearing like a Legend of Zelda shirt. And I'm not a huge Legend of Zelda fan, but I got it in one of those blind boxes of like miscellaneous t-shirts. And a person was like, hey, cool shirt. And I'm like, hey, thanks. Like, it's just like that little casual
Absolutely
nod of the head. Like, you like this, and I don't like Zelda, but I know enough about Zelda that I'll talk about it. So
yeah, you don't have to be like a super fan to represent something. It's just like, I mean, if you hated Zelda, you probably wouldn't have worn it, right? Like, if you're just like, ugh, if I ever see Zelda again, forget it. You wouldn't want somebody to talk to you about it. But I always love that. I think it's cool to like. Well, I always have patches on things and everything, so people always know what I love and what I don't love. But it's cool because it gives you something to talk to people about, even if you don't know them. And you get surprised. Like, just the other day, you and I realized that we both watched some TV shows that are similar. And it was like, oh, more people should talk about these things.
Exactly. I don't even know. Wait, was it
It's
90
90
Day
Day Fiance.
90 Day Fiance? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I just said I love 90 Day Fiance on a
Yeah.
podcast, and I
Yeah.
own it because it's great.
Well, listen, I've talked to who was it? Was it is from another podcaster. Is either Lainey Hobbs of True Crime Fan Club or Melissa of Moms and Murder.
Mhm.
Shout outs to both of them. Yeah, we're all about 90 Day Fiance. That is my show where I've been checking, honest to goodness, because there's like 4 different seasons that they're running right
Right,
now.
yeah.
And I'm going on the website just to see if they have early access episodes of it, just so I can watch them early.
Yeah, I watch all of them, and I love all of them, and it's like, please don't ever take that away from me, world, because it just makes me happy.
Oh, it does. And I think we were talking about, like, don't people use Google to kind of research where they're going?
Oh, yeah, I know, I watch it, and they're like, "Yeah, I'm going to Morocco, but I don't even know where that is." And I'm just going, "Oh my god." I like research when I'm going to a new mall. Like, I can't imagine just booking a flight to a country and not having any clue of, like, what is actually gonna await me there. Yeah, or even the people coming here, like, how do you're moving from whatever, was one of them did from Brazil to Oklahoma, and she's like, "I didn't think Oklahoma would be like this." Well, did you look at it? Like,
Right? It's just something. And
and
then you get some of the family members, it's like, oh gosh, like, I know, I'm sure, like, the casting process is akin to, like, how they used to do MTV Real World, where
yeah, yeah,
you want those people with those stories, and just I guess some of those places are just so remote. Maybe there's not
maybe.
great. I mean, they're FaceTiming and
Yeah,
emailing and everything. I
you would
don't
hope
know.
that the person who lived in that place would kind of, like, take the lead of explaining, like, "This is how life works here." You know? I mean, like, I met my best friend on the internet when I was 13 at the time, and she was in the UK and I was in the US, and by the time I first went to the UK when I was probably, like, 19, I felt like I knew everything because we would tell each other, you
Right.
know? Like, "Oh, yeah, when you come here, this is how the money works, this is what you do, this is that thing," and it wasn't like I showed up going, "What do you mean they have accents?" Like, it doesn't work like that if you pay attention, it's a very bizarre situation on those shows, but I love them.
Me too. It is, and see, everybody's got something to talk about. If you don't have something to talk about with somebody, whether it be a TV show, a book, a movie, a video game, just, I don't know, go find some, go
Right?
back to your childhood and figure out what
Seriously.
step you need to take, because
There's gotta be something that just, like, makes you happy that doesn't necessarily need to be, like, educational or political or, I don't know, gonna change the world, but just sort of, like, gives you that, like, happy feeling where you just wanna talk about it because, like, it's a shared interest and it's exciting for no real reason other than it just is.
exactly.
Go fandom.
Go fandom, go fandom. Well, we're gonna dive into one
Yes.
of the, I think it was one of the most loved fandoms for the past several years, and now I consider it akin to the current fandom issues going on with, say, like Star Wars, where it's
Right.
very divisive. And you got a take on it, so we're going to talk about it.
I do.
And so we're going to talk Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Now, were you into Game of Thrones before the show? Did you get into it during the show? Like the book, like, did you get and read the books?
I
Did
did
you?
read the books, yeah. So I started with the series from when the pilot aired, and somewhere around the middle of season 1, when it was live airing, I started reading the books, and I had finished the books well before the TV series passed them, because I actually usually in my general life, I prefer to read the source material before I see the screen adaptation of anything. That's just the way I am. But I started a little bit behind because I hadn't read the book before the series started, but I did finish it like right around. I finished like the first book right around the same time as season 1 ended, and then I started to get ahead over their hiatus times. So
Mhm.
I have done both. I'm very upset that we don't have the rest of them. I don't know if we ever will. that makes me sad. That was, like, my big concern going into the last season was, like, if they give me an ending here that just makes me really sad, what am I gonna do if the books do come out, and then I have to read it in a longer form? Like, I know a lot of people are feeling like that right now, but I'm not, so 'cause I love the last season, but I looked at it as they were like, You're never gonna love everything about something this big." So I was like, "Okay," there are, like, 1 or 2 things that to me I just needed to see happen, and everything else that happened around it would be okay. Like,
Right.
because felt like that you're never gonna leave a show or a book with that many characters and that many plot lines being really thrilled with how every single one ended,
Mhm.
because, first of all, if everything happens the way I want to happen, I get upset because I like to be surprised. Um, but, I had my, like, 1 or 2 markers where I was like, "Okay, if this happens, I'll be good." And I was really lucky. I got them. So, I was really chill about the whole thing. But yeah, no, definitely with the show since the pilot, never missed an episode, seen them all multiple times, that sort of thing. Love the books, except for the last one, which is it's Did you read the books? Because I haven't listened back to every episode yet of yours. I've listened to many of them, but not every single one.
I did read the books. I did not know it was a book series initially
Right,
until probably the second or third episode of the first season because I
right,
got into it at right as the pilot aired and
right.
everything. And so I borrowed the books from one of my friends and devoured them. And I
Mhm.
mean, and when you're reading the books, you're like, okay, it's got a lot of moving parts. Like
Yes.
there's obviously a ton of stuff in there that they don't show you on the screen that you're not seeing, and maybe you'll get like the mild reference to it
Right.
or a little name drop or whatever. So like for me the books were amazing
Yes.
because there's just so much going on. It's like these little minuscule battles that become these things that affect future stuff and the characters and the
Right.
dynamic. So I love the books. Um, and I remember and I don't remember when it was, like the second season or the third season when George R. R. Martin was like, "Oh yeah, I told the showrunners like how it's going to end in
Right.
case I die." And apparently
He might before it comes out, he might.
yeah, he'd come out and said, "Oh yeah, I want to make sure that I get this next book, like the sixth book, whatever the book is called, like
Mhm.
A Winds of Winter.
Mhm.
I want to get that out." Like he had been working on that before the show had even started,
Yeah. He's not
and
a
he's like, "I
fast
want to get it
writer.
out before that, and then I want to get this one done, like the last one." It's like, okay, um,
We would like that too.
yeah, I guess the one thing that confuses me is he's doing so many other projects
Yep.
that aren't the books,
Yep.
and I don't get it, but I mean, I understand maybe you need a break from writing the books because you've been writing them since like what the night, like
90s,
he's been
right?
doing it since the '90s, so it's almost like what 30 years at this point.
Yeah. It's a long time. You kinda think that you just kind of wanna get it finished at that point, like,
Yeah,
for your own sanity?
but yes, I love the books and I enjoyed the
Yeah.
TV show.
I think that with me, my friend had told me this afterwards, that there was, like, a breakdown online where you could read the 2 books, like, put together. Because how the last 2 books, like, each have certain characters, but they're kind of like the same timeline.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But my friend was like, "Oh, yeah. Why?" Because I was like, I loved the second to last book because it had, like, every character that I liked in it, and
Mhm.
then I didn't so much like the last one because it was all the characters that I liked less. And so my friend was like, "Well, why didn't you just look it up online where there's this combination thing and it tells you how you can, like, read both books simultaneously by mixing the chapters together?" And I was like, "That sounds like a lot of work, but I probably should have done it because it would have made me really enjoy the chapters in the very last book, well, the last current book, more because it would have been intermixed." Like, I find, like, when there's a book series like that where there's a lot of different characters, there are certain point of views that I prefer. I mean, that's for everybody. And, it would have been probably better to have the ones I preferred intermixed with the ones I didn't prefer, because
Right.
you kind of get to break it up a little more, and then like, oh gosh, here's my 15th chapter by this character that I really don't care about, which is not nice to say, but it happens. Everybody has characters that they like and don't like, and when I say that, when it comes to the TV show, none of that has to do with the performers, because like I'm very vocal about my complete hatred of the character Daenerys, but I love Emilia Clarke, so please don't take it as I don't like her. It's different to say you don't like the character, you don't like the person performing it.
Hmm. Yeah, there's no hate. Nobody sent hate
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I can sit there and say, "Oh, I really don't like this character, I really never did," whatever, but I doesn't mean I didn't like the person, it doesn't mean I didn't like their performance of that character, it just means that in terms of resonating with me, that character was not, or those whatever, any fandom you want to apply it to, was not on the top of my list.
So, which characters are high in your Game of Thrones list of characters that you love?
Well, I have a top 3, which my top 2 are very unpopular. My top 2 are Jaime and Cersei, and then my 3rd is Sansa.
Okay.
Um, I'm of the mindset that people would like Cersei more if they had seen her when she was as semi-innocent as Sansa was originally.
Mhm.
Because you get to, a lot of people didn't like her, Sansa, in the beginning of the
Nope.
TV show.
Yeah.
There was a lot of hatred, and
Oh, tons of hatred.
yeah, and I always was like, I liked her because she kind of was that character who believed that everything was kind of gonna go the way it was supposed to because she had been told that these are certain things that happen. Like, oh, she was gonna marry the prince and then she was gonna become the queen and like the way it goes. And then like you got to watch kind of her world fall apart as none of these things happened and she learned the reality of it. And I feel like by seeing that and watching her transition, people like her more now that she ended up kind of a harder character.
Hmm.
But when you parallel her, she's kind of like, I call her Cersei on delay, although she won't ever probably get to that extreme. But like Cersei had things that she believed were going to happen, you know, that happened before the show begins, so that by the time we meet her, she's already kind of disheartened, disillusioned, cynical, and somewhat nasty lady. So I always like to say that they're not really as far apart as characters as people like to think that they are. But that's why I think I like both of them, because they have certain similarities that if nobody else picked out are just in my head, and that's okay. I'm fine with my beliefs being in my head. I own them. And Jamie, he's the kind of character I kind of like it because you often see a situation where you have kind of like a jerky guy and then there's like a woman following them around all the time. And I kind of like the fact that Cersei kind of had all the power over him in a way. I mean, he was
Hmm.
kind of jerky too, but the devotion there, whether it was healthy or not, which we all know it wasn't, um, it appealed to me that they kind of were unapologetic for who they were, and that when you saw them, you kind of always knew that no matter what needed to be done to protect themselves, they would do it, and I appreciate that ruthlessness. And I'm also a real huge sucker for tragedy, and I think everything about their relationship was tragic. And I have a really hard time responding to characters where they're inherently good from the beginning and kind of like always good.
Hmm.
I like moral ambiguity. It doesn't mean that I approve of their actions. Like, I'm not sitting here saying like, let's all go push a child from a window. Like, that's not what I'm telling people to do. But I find those characters more interesting because I like to get in there and see how they work a little bit more.
Right.
Like in my real world, I'm not going to go and like, I don't have a brother, but I'm not going to go and like have a love affair with my twin brother and then like push a kid out a window. Like, that's not going to happen. So when I'm watching television or I'm reading a book, I really love to look at these characters and see how they look at the world and how they function within it. Because I'm a big believer in that. I don't remember who said it. One of those famous phrases that kind of just came down through the ages of that, like, the villain never sees themselves as the villain.
Right.
And so it's so easy to like, I heard this a lot, especially as the series was going on, that like Cersei was the villain of the show. And I was just like, yeah, but she doesn't think she's the villain of the show. Like, she's not waking up in the morning and saying, I'm the villain. You know, she's waking up and saying, I have this position. This position is important to me. I'm going to do whatever the heck it takes for me to stay here.
Hmm.
And, I don't care if you don't like it. It was kind of her mentality. And I love that. I love people who will just sit there and say, like, I'm doing my thing. Might not be the best thing for everybody else, but this is how I am. I like the darker sides of characters, which is maybe because I'm too much of a goody goody in the real world. Like, I look at these things like I would never do any of this stuff. I'd be like the person cowering under the table in the corner. But yeah, so those are my top 3, and they're not, I guess, well, Jamie and Cersei, I tend to get a lot of flack for because they are so easy to hate. At least Jamie was at the beginning. By the end, a lot
Right.
more people liked him. But I'll tell you, when I watched that pilot and like he pushed Bran out that window, I was like, sign me up, I'm ready. Like, this is my new favorite show. These are my new favorite characters. This is amazing. Like, let's go. And I was lucky in the sense that I never stopped liking them. Like, that can happen over the course of,
Hmm.
however many years. You have people who will say, like, oh, I really loved character X in the beginning and I don't like them now. But with them, it never changed. Sansa never changed either. I always, maybe it's just because I'm stubborn, I always really liked her. There aren't there aren't many that I would say I didn't like. Like, it's hard to say that I hated any to the extent that I loved them,
Right.
like a polar opposite. But like, I was never a huge Daenerys fan, which I've already said. Like, so one of the reasons I was okay with season 8 was because one of the two, I had my two criteria were, one was that Jamie and Cersei died together if they were going to go, and the other was that Daenerys died. Those were like the only two things I cared about. It's like, I didn't really care how things happened. I didn't really care. I just wanted to feel like things were true to the characters, and I know a lot of people don't think that that's what happened, and that's okay, because there are a lot of shows that ended in ways that I didn't particularly care for.
Hmm.
It's just the way it goes. But for me, kind of, even though it wasn't necessarily an arc that gave people who didn't like them satisfaction, I think that that's okay, because what happened with the two of them was true to who they were, right? Like, it would have been fine. People would have possibly been happier to see, like, Jamie has this full redemption arc and either he kills her or he runs off with Brienne or whatever. But I really like the kind of tragic full circle nature of it. It's like, my friends are going, You're okay with if your favorite characters die by the end of the series?" And I was like, I'd rather them have a death that I felt was appropriate than a living ending that was lame.
Hmm.
I'm a sucker also for a good death, as you can tell from this very quickly. I like dark things. Um, so I was okay about it. I was like, it was kind of inevitable that certain characters are going to die. I get more annoyed when a show refuses to kill somebody off.
I was surprised that they didn't kill off as many people as I was expecting.
Right?
I was expecting 50%.
Yeah.
At bare minimum, 50% of the characters going in. I did not expect, and especially after episode 3,
Yep.
where it's like, are you telling me that the only people who really, got it was like Theon and
Yep.
Jorah for the most part? And you get like oh gosh, the other one, the Knight Brotherhood guy,
Oh, Dondarrion.
yeah, Beric Dondarrion. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, I mean, he's
Sure.
been around for a while, but sure, but like I'm expecting like
Yeah.
by the end of that episode, I was expecting them to be like not even having people around.
Yeah. That was probably there were kind of 2 points of the season where I just went, "Huh?" And they were both in that episode. It was the fact that, like, I was sitting there going, "If people don't die tonight, I'm gonna be annoyed. Not because I was, like, looking for a bloodbath, but when you set up this huge confrontation that's literally based on battle, it's very hard to imagine everybody who's important gets through it okay. Like, at least maim somebody, which again, not condoning violence, but when you're looking at a war situation, the odds are, right, that, like, something bad is going to happen to somebody who's important,
Hmm.
you know? So when that kinda didn't really, I mean, not that they weren't unimportant characters, but there wasn't anybody that dying changed what had to happen going forward.
Right.
I guess that's kind of where I was kinda thinking, "Oh, that's lame." But the other one was at, the end of that episode when the whole thing kind of just ends, and then we move on. It's like, nobody has any questions? Like, nobody wants to sit here and say, "What the heck just happened?" "How did this work this way?" We're all just okay with it, we're gonna move along. Like, it's like the bell rings, we change classes, no big deal. Um, so those were the 2 moments probably in the whole season where I just went, "Oh, that was interesting." But I felt like overall, I was glad that they did the longer episodes.
Yes.
I thought that was important because it would have probably felt even more rushed, kind of without that. And I don't even know that I necessarily believe that they needed more time because I've seen a lot of discussions of that. So much as I feel like it was kind of a snowball effect. You've been slowly rolling the snowball over all these years, and then you get to this point where so many things have to happen and they're going to happen back to back because it's just the nature of the way these things go. That I kind of appreciated the picked up speed, except for when, you know, nobody died and we just acted like that was normal. But overall, I felt like it gave me everything that I needed from it in the sense that there was closure, there were sad parts. It didn't. Okay, so just to explain why I'm saying this, there was a period around the Battle of the Bastards season where I started to be like, "Oh, no. This is going to end in some way where, like, Jon and Daenerys meet up and they fall in love, and the whole rest of the series is how virtuous they are, and I'm gonna just wanna kill myself by the end of, not literally, but, like, be angry by the end of the series because it's just gonna be all about, like, the righteous good and the evil."
Hmm.
And that probably would have killed me internally because it would have, for me, felt like it was going away from what the show was. I I just felt like they were kind of pushing that narrative a lot. So I think that's why when you started to see dynamics shifting, whether it was, Jamie and Cersei kind of going in different directions, or when Daenerys finally makes it to Westeros and nobody's really excited that she's there, that was like one of my favorite moments in the whole series. And I was just like, "Oh, okay." They didn't like, they were kinda just setting you up. I tend to be very afraid. I've seen, like, you see so many shows where the original heart of the show kind of disappears when a show runs for too long.
Hmm. Yep.
Um, and I lived kind of in fear of that in recent seasons, especially when they started to surpass the books. I was like, "Oh, no. Are they gonna, like, lose the fact that not everything should go the way people want it to go? Are they gonna, like, drift away from who these characters were supposed to be?" And I kind of was relieved once she came to Westeros and Sansa kind of looked at her like, "Who the heck are you, and why are you here, and why do I care about you?" I was like, "Okay, I'm here now, I'm ready." So I think it worked for me.
That was one of the things that I always appreciated was, you've got these characters like Varys and
Mhm.
these characters that are telling Daenerys, "Oh, they're talking about you over there. They're ready for you to come back.
Right.
They need you to come back." And it's like,
No.
to pretty much 99% of the people, they just want to live their life without having
Yep.
to either be died, raped, I mean, extorted,
Yep.
any pretty much, like, let Hot Pie bake his bread and
Yep.
let people do what they want to do without them being like pressed into war for like the greater good of the Starks or the Lannisters or
Yeah, they just want peace, they don't really care. Like, whoever's gonna be the one that leaves them alone is the one they're gonna be okay with, the average
Exactly.
person. And, like, think about it, if it was you, like, and all of a sudden this weird woman you don't know about, like, the only thing you really know about her family as an average person is that, like, her dad was crazy, and as she shows up and she's got these huge dragons that could literally kill you anytime they feel like it, are you
Hmm.
really gonna be excited about that? Like, it's it's not, the average person wasn't following her through her journey to really care.
Right.
You know? So, I was really that was when I kind of got really invested again. I mean, I was always following it, I was always watching it, but I had been kind of like, "Oh, no, if she shows up on the shore and she's received like she's the second coming, I'm gonna be in for it." So, I loved that they went with a more realistic reaction of like, "Who is this person? Why is she here? Why am I supposed to support her?" You
And
know?
she wants our food.
Yeah, like, she's got these huge monster dragon things that, like, she's really proud of, but I don't know what they're gonna do. It's at some point, it also becomes a question of, like, which is better, the monster you already know or the monster you don't know yet, but you think might be better? Like, sometimes it's easier to deal with what you know already
Hmm.
than it is to kind of take a flyer on someone who may or may not just burn you to pieces tomorrow.
Exactly, because that and I have a lot of friends and they're all over on their opinions of the show. And I
Yeah,
did read I and you know, every I'm totally fine because I'm not going to poo poo on anybody's stuff.
right,
I did like somebody's thing where they're like, you cheered when she killed the masters and
right,
cheered when she liberated these cities and killed the other people. And
right.
so now here it is, and she's killing these other people, and you're upset because of, well, Tyrion told you that the bells, and everyone's like, okay, the bells. And
Right.
that was like for me because I love Tyrion. Tyrion's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
one of my favorite guys, and I'm like, okay, Tyrion's had some he's really struck out recently, but he he's got this all set up.
Bless him.
There shouldn't be a problem. We should be okay. I mean, he's got Jamie's gonna sneak in and do what
Right.
he needs to do,
The Bells is, like, my favorite episode of the whole
and it
series.
you take that moment, it's like that breath of, okay, now we're gonna
Right,
deal with some stuff, and it's like,
right.
oh snap, like I was not expecting that at
Yeah.
all.
No, I love that. I love that because actually, like, the last season was when, to me, Daenerys became the most interesting, and I think it's because, like, I actually started to like her by the end of it, which I guess says more about me than anything else, but it was because you start to see her really confront the things that she's wanted from afar,
Hmm.
and like you said, I mean, it would have been weird if it had all gone smoothly. When you get to the ringing of the bells and stuff, like that, everything would have just been like, "Okay, sure, we're just gonna put everything down and let's move along. It's gonna be great." That's not really that kind of world. But I loved kind of seeing, that she takes it a step too far because that's like a running theme, right? Somebody will look like they're doing something good and then it goes a step too far, and it's not really shock. She didn't really have a true personal connection to these people.
Hmm.
These are the people who basically were like, "Oh, no big deal," when her family got killed and exiled. The people living in King's Landing and all the surrounding areas, they weren't fighting for the Targaryens to come back.
Yep.
So, it wasn't to me as much of a stretch as I guess it was to some other people that would have happened, that would be her reaction, because like you said, she had if you can go back to the first season, and then when her brother gets killed, and yeah, he was a real prize, but like her reaction is very cold, and it's very sort of like disassociated from the emotion of what it could have been for somebody else, even though he was a horrible person.
Hmm.
So for me, seeing that kind of manifest finally in Westeros with some form of anger or just fed up rage was exciting. I mean, those poor people, like, you never, those poor people running through the streets didn't stand a chance. and that's not their fault, and it shouldn't have happened to them. But with that type of a character, it to me, it felt like a natural extension of who she was. Like you were just seeing it finally really come out because she was put in a situation where it was tested, and it wasn't going necessarily how she wanted it to go.
Exactly. There's a moment in that episode too, I think it's in the bells, where before the attack starts, there's that conversation between like John and Daenerys about like his, him being a Targaryen
Right,
and how he needs to not just be with her,
right,
and then like Grey Worm is doing his thing, and it's like leading up to where like there's a moment and they're going through the city and John spots Grey Worm, and this is not the episode where like Grey Worm's just killing all the Lannister soldiers that have given up. It's the
right,
one before it,
right,
where like you've got the Starks and Davos and John. They're going through the streets and they run into Grey Worm, and Grey Worm's like there just killing people, and
right.
John's like, "What are you doing?" And I swear on everything, I thought that Grey Worm was going to just spear John in the
I
heart and
think I
be
thought
like,
that too at that point. I was like, "What's gonna happen here now?" He
because he takes his orders from
Right,
Daenerys.
right.
John doesn't have anything to do with this.
No, no, you're totally right. It was interesting to see all the different interactions, like, once it got to point because it's all nice and good to, like, pretend that we're all loyal to each other, and we're all gonna work together, and everything's gonna be great, you know? And then you're actually, like, thrown into the real situation, and things change, and they change really fast, and you don't really know kind of who's on what side or when or, what's gonna change for each person as they're all experiencing the same thing with very different backstories coming into it. Like Grey Worm doesn't really care about John. He cares about Daenerys. He cares
Hmm.
about, his people. And John is, John. He he kind of operates in his own world, and he can sit there and say like, "Oh, it doesn't matter to me that this is who I am," all he wants. Like it matters. It matters to everybody else. It's kind of like, in actual historical stuff where you look at it and you say as long as there's somebody around who could be seen as a legit claimant to the throne, they're always going to be a threat because there's always going to be somebody to support them the minute the person
Hmm.
on the throne does something wrong. And I appreciated that aspect of it because it is a very real sentiment. Like she could love him all she wants, but she knows that the minute she does something and anybody who knows who John really is kind of knows that he should be there anyway, they're going
Hmm.
to start pushing for him over her.
Yep. And that was the other thing too, is when like that scene in the last episode, I didn't know for a split second who did it to who. I was like, oh snap, like
Right,
did she do it to him? Like,
right. And anything was possible. Although my heart does go out to Drogon. Like, that really was sad. I was like, this poor dragon did not ask for any of this. And he's been made to be basically a weapon. And then he watched his brothers die.
hmm.
And then he watched his mom die. This poor guy. I was very sad. I felt very bad for the dragon. And I mean that like sincerely. I was very upset. It's like this poor dragon. Oh my gosh.
I do like all the fan comments about where Drogon took Daenerys to be brought back from like
Right.
another Red Priestess or to
Right.
go somewhere. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I told my friend she was gonna come back in the sequel as the Night Queen. I mean, I was kidding, but I was like, you never know. Weirder things have happened in these series.
Exactly.
We'll hear all of a sudden that there she comes with her night army now. She's gone. She's gone from fire to ice. Drogon's got a crown. Who the heck knows? Maybe she's hunting Arya in the west of Westeros. We don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, I think they had what, five different like Game of Thrones type spin-offs that they were thinking of doing.
Right,
And
right, right.
apparently as they've been whittling them down, and I think that there's one that they may be working on, but it's supposed to be like set during like the Bran the Builder era
Right.
of like
Is that the
these.
Naomi Watts one? Wasn't there one with
Yeah,
Naomi
yeah.
Watts? Yeah. Which I would watch because I love her and because it's, Game of Thrones adjacent, so I'd at least try it.
Hmm.
But it could be interesting. I really would have loved a proper series of Robert's Rebellion. I have a special place in my heart for the Baratheons. I feel like if I lived in that world, that's what I would have been. Like,
What's the connection? Because I'm super curious about that.
I don't, I don't know. My friends and I always, how people say like, "Oh, what's your Hogwarts house?"
Yeah, exactly. Like,
I,
and that's always a typical question I ask my Game of Thrones peoples.
right.
Well, what house would you be?
I mean, I would have been like a Lannister sympathizing Baratheon, so I guess I would have been like Myrcella. But like, um, I've always just felt like I look like them, because all the houses have a sort of
Hmm. Distinct
distinct look. I have
characteristic. Yeah.
right. I would have probably been one of them, or maybe if not them, a Stark with the kind of darker hair and the paler skin. But I think it was a matter of like there's a stubbornness to them and in a sort of opinionated nature, no positives, and a determination. And I loved all three of the Baratheon brothers.
Okay.
I would have loved to have had dinner with them. I don't count them in my like top three favorite characters of all time because we didn't really spend enough time with them, and they still are not my top three favorites. But as a house, I feel like I would have lived in the Stormlands. It's just kind of a very they have like to jump on Stormlands. They have like a very stormy sort of personality. They were all very different, but
Hmm.
there were these underlying sort of beliefs that you're right. Um, ability to defend yourself, to fight for what you need, willingness to kind of like die on the hill, you know, that I just think that's where I would have ended up. And I always talk to my friend about this because she would have been in High Garden. She absolutely would have been a Tyrell. And she's always like, you would have been a Baratheon. Like, I know. Just take it. That's exactly where I would have been. Where would you have been?
Oh man. I self-identify with the Starks
Right.
mostly because I like to be cold.
I like to
Um,
be cold too.
I mean, I hate living in Florida because it's so hot, and
I
we're
hate
in the time period now where it's just so hot and
yeah.
it's humid, and I hate going out, so I'll
Yeah.
just stay inside. The kids want to ride their scooters or bicycles. I'm like, no, I have to sit outside and watch you because
Yeah.
this is the world that we live in
Yep.
where they
You
can't
have
do
to.
anything outside without a parent watching them.
Yes, and sweating never makes me happy.
Exactly. I'm always fine with putting on more clothes than having to take stuff
Oh my
off.
gosh, that's what I tell people all the time because I hate summer and I love winter. And I'm always like, you can only take off a certain amount of things before you get arrested. You can put
Exactly.
on as many things as you want and nobody's going to care.
Exactly. So, I do identify with them. Of course, it's like I always feel it's like the default choice. Either you really love like the Starks,
Hmm.
or you love the Targaryens, or you love the Lannisters. And
Hmm.
I mean, there's some smaller houses where I'd be like, yeah, I could do the Mormonts. Like,
Right.
I love Lyanna Mormont.
Right.
She's probably one of my favorite
Yeah.
mini characters that came out of this TV series was her.
Yeah.
Or
I actually like Jorah too. I mean, he had
yeah,
his issues, but like the two of them were both cool.
I mean, all three of the Mormonts were relatively wonderful characters.
Right.
Jorah was Jorah. I can't say a lot about him as
Right.
far as like him pledging himself to Daenerys, but I've been there with my thoughts on people way back in the day, like 20 or 30 years ago.
Right. Right.
Where it's like, oh, I'll do anything for you. I'll
Right.
follow you around. And
Yeah. And he was complex. He had his issues when he first started out. He wasn't perfect.
yep.
Yeah.
So I mean, I feel I default to Stark, but there's wiggle room. I
Yeah.
don't, I wouldn't be a Lannister. I wouldn't be a Martell. I wouldn't be a Tyrell.
Right.
Definitely not like a Frey or a. Oh gosh, what's the um I'm totally blanking. The Greyjoy. Like I
Greyjoy.
wouldn't have
Oh,
been a
I have a
Greyjoy.
friend who's a total Greyjoy. Yeah, she loves them. She would absolutely be one. She would be Asha slash Yara, depending on what version we're going by. No question.
Exactly.
Absolutely. But like if you had to pick from just the big three, I would self-identify Lannister. I just would, which I guess makes me a lot of enemies, but I love them. But like if I just look at it from kind of the outside and say like based on my personality type and the way I look and kind of all the sort of things compiled together, I definitely would have been a Baratheon, and I'm okay with that because they're they were interesting. They're may they rest a long time ago. Still sad
Uh,
about Stannis.
it is definitely something, and I do want to ask before we switch off of Game of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thrones, as far as the person that became the leader essentially, Bran.
Yes.
In your head, would you have gone a different way? I mean, I totally I'm cool with Sansa being where she is with
Yeah.
the North being independent, but would you have gone a different way
I
for
mean,
someone else?
I was interested in the way that went down. I mean, I was fine with it. None of it made me angry or anything. I was totally fine with it. But I was kind of surprised that when they're holding that big meeting about like who's going to be the person in charge next, and Sansa says, I'm going to take the North and we're going to do our own thing. That nobody else said that they were going to do that too. I thought at least maybe Asha Greyjoy might have said that. Like I
I,
agree.
yeah, and
Bye.
I was thinking, and I think they had an interview with the character or the actor that played whoever was in charge of Dorne,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
and how I guess some of the stuff that he did as like facial reactions or
Right,
even stuff got cut, as far as like they told him to be like a bit grumpier, but like a little like a harder exterior character.
right,
But they didn't tell him until like his last day, where like certain things had already been filmed, and it's like, oh, you can't really go back.
right,
But that's what a lot of people that I've seen on the internet have been like, w- sure, Starks, that's fine, North
right.
way, but Dorne's the same way in the South.
Yeah, it was I was surprised that nobody said that. I was also surprised by the fact that so obviously Bran is now like the three-eyed raven and he's not going to go around like having a wife and children.
Hmm.
But I was looking at it and thinking, but that doesn't mean whoever is king or queen after him won't. So I'm not really sure that their election plan is going to go the way they think it's going to go. Because if you think about it, once you have somebody elected on the throne that then has children, their priorities for what's going to happen after them could shift. So I thought it was interesting. I didn't mind that it was Bran because I do feel like he's sort of removed from all of the kind of petty infighting that they all have going on,
Hmm.
which I appreciated. He is a weird guy. Not but, I mean, it's really essentially Tyrion. Like, I mean, it's Bran, but Tyrion's running the day-to-day stuff, which I'm fine with
Hmm.
because they do that whole scene at the table. Yeah, I kind of thought it was really great that you have these 2 characters, Bran, who essentially was, made disabled by being thrown out the window. Tyrion, who was frowned upon, because of his height situation or being what they called him the imp, and he didn't. I actually thought that was weird that he always hated being called the imp, and then he decided that Bran was going to be called Bran the Broken.
Yep.
And I was like, dude, they're gonna start calling you the imp again. Like, you didn't like that very much. Why would you think this guy would like this? Um, and then you have like the first female that we know of, first female head of the Knights Guard, Kingsguard. Sorry, my brain's going. And you have Sansa ruling in the north. Like, so there's a lot of different situations going on with who's in power now that I thought were really interesting, and I had absolutely no complaints about any of them. But I don't know if you had sat me down and said like, who's gonna be on the throne, not the Iron Throne, because that's gone. At the end, I would have said, oh, it's gonna be Bran. But when they said it, I was like, Oh, okay. Especially because it's really Tyrion to me. Because that's just, he basically says to Tyrion at one point, like, "You handle all this. I'm gonna go see if I can figure out where Drogon's gone." And Tyrion being behind the throne is, he's learned his lessons. I don't think he would be a bad person. I think he would learn from the mistakes that came before them and try and make it
Exactly.
better. So I was okay with it. Were you okay with it?
I was fine with. I'm totally fine how Sansa's arc went.
Yeah.
And having the North be independent. After that, it gets really dicey, especially if you're removing John out of the
Right.
equation, which it cracks me up with the memes of, okay, they've sailed away and you can come back. You don't have to go. I mean, no one will know because they're going to stay in that little corner of the world.
Yeah.
So, um, you know, I don't really see any other choices.
Yeah, there weren't that many, like, right up there candidates.
Exactly. I do like the fact that Edmure Tully, like,
Oh,
you
I
know,
love that scene.
that that was one of the funniest things. Was just, wow, okay,
I was
let's
like, "Oh, he's
let's
back."
let's go there.
But that's what would happen, right? You'd always have that one person who's like, "Well, actually, I could do it," and everybody else be like, "Sit down. Please stop
I mean, I
talking."
always like Davos, but I like where he ended up at. I mean,
Yeah, no, I liked him too.
of the certain characters where it's like, okay, you've got Sam Tarley
Yep,
doing the thing that he wanted to do his whole life,
yep,
and you got Davos in charge of the thing, and you even got Braun, who
bless his
is
heart.
the master of coin, and okay. So, it generally works out because it's Arya's definitely not going to do it. Sansa's
No,
doing her thing, and we don't have any other established characters.
I do love Gendry. Didn't do anything really at the end, but I love him. I
Yeah,
enjoyed him.
another funny thing on Gendry, and I'm trying to get uh you know wrap this up, but
Sorry.
Gendry. Oh no, it's totally fine. Gendry, I like that. So the thing that I saw was, okay, Daenerys made him a legitimate Baratheon,
Yep,
which would put him
yep,
in favor or in that higher, like
absolutely.
he would have more claim to the throne at this point.
Yep. He could have totally been like, by the way, I was made well, I guess I would say that what she did didn't count anymore, but you could have been like, "Hey, I'm here. By the way, I can take the throne,
I
make
mean,
everybody
I
hammers."
I am in line.
That's right, and nobody even seemed to think about that later on, but I guess he probably wasn't really interested in it.
No, I think he is. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. Oh, I say interesting to see because we won't ever see it. But
In our
it'd be
heads, we
interesting
will.
to see how Gendry is as a lord, and hopefully
Right.
he would usher in maybe some nicer things.
Yeah, he'll be and once he gets over Arya.
Yeah, and I know that the one thing that a friend of mine was really upset with many seasons ago was like the lack of Dorne being anywhere
Yeah,
in the show as
yeah.
as they are portrayed, and it's
I
like,
loved Dorne in the books. I loved
oh
it,
yeah,
and then they did it on the show, and I was like, "Oh, alright."
yep.
That's sad.
Yeah, but hopefully
No.
we get the books.
Yeah, she can't win them all. That definitely could have been done better because that was I loved Dorne in the books.
Hmm.
I really enjoyed that whole section.
Yeah, all the different sand snakes and
Yes, there
all the
was
different stuff going on, and
it said it was like a throwaway plot line,
yep.
and it was a disservice. I mean, the show is not perfect. Don't get me wrong. As much as I say, like, I loved the series overall, there were definitely things about it that were not perfect.
Oh, absolutely.
But ultimately, when you look at it as a whole, I did not have any problems with the way it kind of completed itself. And The Bells is probably going to be my favorite episode for a very long time.
It is definitely something. It's interesting. I'm seeing now. I saw somebody ask about it, and they said, "Does the final season destroy like the rewatchability of the series in general?" And the answer is no. And in fact, I
Right.
have somebody watching it now, and they're like, "It's interesting to like watch season one and pick up on all these little things
Yep.
that are tied into the like even the last season, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Meanwhile, I was at BookCon last week, and these 2 girls were talking in front of me at line for a signing, and one girl was like, "I just started watching Game of Thrones because now that it's over, I can watch the whole thing straight through." And the other girl was telling her, "Whatever you do, just stop before the last season because it'll just ruin the whole thing. You're wasting your time." And I was like, "What?" First of all, you never tell somebody to not watch something like that because you don't know what they're gonna think of it. And second of all, you need to watch the ending. Like, even if you don't like it, you need to follow it to that conclusion so you can make I'm a very big believer that you can't say you hate something until you've seen or done the whole thing. So, like, there are shows that I've stopped watching. I just go, "Oh, yeah, I stopped watching it then." But to tell somebody to just stop before the last season, it's just like, I couldn't imagine doing that.
yeah, I don't, and my wife is the same way. She said, "Oh, it's over now. I can start watching it," because her thing is that she needs to be able to pay attention on shows that are that long with
Right.
that number of characters to understand. Especially in the first season, you got like 500 different characters
Yep.
from like Master of Arms to random people that show up, and you're like, "Oh, who are these people?"
Right, exactly.
So I look forward to watching it with her
Oh, yeah, that's gonna be
gets
awesome.
once she gets ready to.
It'll be great, and you can, like, sing The Reigns of Castamere or Jenny of Old Stones, which I listen to, like, every single day because I just love that song so much. It's great.
Okay, we're getting off Game of Thrones now,
Sorry.
but we're going to go to something that I have no clue about.
Okay.
But I like learning about things through people that are here as my guest,
Yeah.
and you're going to tell me about this trilogy by Vic James called the Dark Gifts trilogy.
Yes, my favorite. I actually got a ring made recently that had a line from those books in it because I was like, if I wear it around, people will ask me about it, and then it'll become like a huge thing, and I'll be really excited. Um, it's a trilogy of books, as you just said. The last book came out end of last year, beginning of this year. I ordered it on the. It's a UK written book, and I ordered them based on a UK release because I couldn't wait for them to be in the US. So
Hmm.
my idea of exact dates of when they came out is probably a little bit off. But it's I kind of want it to be the next big Game of Thrones-esque television series. It's not the same in that it's not like a full-blown, like, 700-page each book, heavy reading story, but it's set in sort of a alternative modern Britain where society is split between people who have what they call skill with a capital S and people who do not have it. And people who have skill, it's sort of like an innate kind of magical power that's aligned with a certain type of element. I mean, they don't ever sit there and call it magic, they call it skill the whole time. There's no
Okay.
spell casting, you know. And part of the plot line is that anybody who is not a skilled person, so your muggle, if you will, has to do about 10 years of basically slave service to the people who either have skill in one of their houses or in these giant, what would amount to like horribly gross factory towns. And they're one of the few countries left in the world that have this sort of slave capacity to it. So instead of it being about necessarily like race or gender, it becomes about skill or no skill,
Okay.
and it follows in the same sense of Game of Thrones. It follows multiple characters who each have their own point of view chapters, which I love. So you get kind of the perspectives of the people who are on the ground and first going in for their slave days. And you also get the perspectives of the people who are running the country and causing these things to happen and who firmly believe that, like, this is the way it's supposed to be and you have to serve your 10 years. And if you serve your 10 years too, they say, like, if you serve your 10 years too young, you never get over them. If you serve your 10 years too late in life, you don't survive them. So it's this like I appreciate it because much like Game of Thrones, you don't know what's going to come next. There were certain parts where I was reading these books and going, "Oh my gosh, she just killed that character, and I did not see that coming. And why did this happen?" It's actually the author. Vic James, was also a big Lannister fan. So I guess that kind of tells you why I was into it. I'm waiting for it to be kind of like the next big thing since like the Hunger Games. I want to just like explode because you get into this world where no character is really wholly good or wholly evil. They're all sort of products of where they were born and the life that they've known, and they clash together as they have to start working and who fits where and what happens when a person who has skill then has a daughter or son who does not, because it kind of turns the social order upside down. And it's very cinematic in the way that it's written because the power that comes from this skill that these people have can, rebuild a building, or I don't know, take control of a fountain or make something be animated that is not. So you could just, when you read it, it feels like you're watching it on television, even though you're not,
Hmm.
which I love too, because I think good visuals in books are so important, because you really need to build your world. And she just, it's like a masterclass in readable world building. It involves history, but not in a sense that's alienating. It kind of gives you the history of how these skilled people started to take power away from non-skilled rulers. And it's very epic, even though it's not exceedingly long. But certain things just have that epic feel to them. I recently passed them on to my friend, and she started texting me in the middle of the night going, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it, like, this happened to Jenna," or whatever. So and there's a very, like, in my mind, kind of Baratheon brotherhood with those 3 brothers who are all from the highest level of society, and their different relationships with each other, with their family, with their skill, what this all means. There's people of all different backgrounds in it. There's really no kind of stone left unturned, and now I feel like I'm her publicity person. Like, "This is so great." It's just compulsively readable for anybody who enjoys kind of like, an alternative historical fiction with, like, the magic element, because you don't sit there and have, like, dragons come in and you're not casting spells in the corner, but there's a very real element of, like, a corrupt, dark aristocracy, and that you learn not everybody within it is horrible, whereas at the same time, not everybody who's in the lower classes is good. There's a lot of the sort of, moral twists and turns as much as there are definitive good and definitive bad, and I think a lot of that comes from the same sort of element as the Game of Thrones with the different perspectives being shown, and I just want everybody to go out and read it. Please do. Gilded Cage is the first book, so then you can come and talk to me about it, because that's what I want. I want to be having people do episodes of fandom shows where they're talking about these books.
And see, that's one of the things that I love getting to do, because I've had a number of other guests where they tell me about these book series that I've never heard of, and
Right.
I feel like, and I'm going on 40 this year,
Okay.
and a couple of years ago I really made the effort to, I'm going to read books, and I
Right.
think in 1 year I read almost 50,
Okay.
but then the following year is like 2.
Right.
And this year is 0 at this point because you get caught up
I
in
get it.
life stuff, and it's hard to and I swear to gosh, like, I ordered probably 7 or 8 books this year,
Right.
and they're sitting on my
Yep.
bookshelf to be read, along with like 30 books on my Kindle.
Yep.
And
I know that feeling very well.
I don't have a commute anymore, so I
Oh,
stopped
that's
listening to
hard.
most of my podcasts. So
Right.
so for like the past 2 years, no commute. So
Right.
therefore, any podcast I was listening to, I'm not listening to
Right.
anymore.
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about commuting is,
And then
yeah,
yeah, and
like, I'm
then
on a
and
train, I can read it, like, it's great.
exactly. And so like I used to make time to read,
Right.
but with the kids having more activities now,
Mhm.
or they need more on hand stuff, or it's just I don't carve out the time for like the 30 minutes or an hour that I should be spending time reading.
Right. No, I totally get that. These are kind of like, it starts out where you kind of look at it and go, okay, is this going to be like another book where starts off with a young girl who's like obsessed with the noble families in the area, and is it going to go this typical way where like she goes to the place and the guy falls in love with her and everything's going to be great? You know, it's like no, you learn very fast that it's not. It's more like it's much more brutal than I thought it was going to be, and it goes in a lot of those twisty ways where you're like, oh my gosh, okay, she just went there and she took me with her, and I completely believe that this happened. And I think that's important because none of it in there feels like it's happening just for the sake of happening. And it kind of keeps you going, especially when people, like you're saying, you have to prioritize, right? Like you only now have a certain amount of time to read where it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
So it never feels like it's wasting your time, which is not something I can say for all of the Game of Thrones books every once in a while because he gets wordier and wordier. And I love them. But this, I felt like every scene that and I've read the series more than once now of the Dark Gift series, but every scene or every chapter, I should say, feeds into something else later on, which is important. And there's so much that you get from revisiting it, which I never reread books because I always feel like I should be moving on to the next thing because there are so many things I want to get to.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually reread this whole series because I was like, okay, now I finished it. I need to go back and look at how exactly everything got to where it got.
Right.
And the very fact that it caused me to do that made me think that it was something that I really needed other people to start reading. So people go start reading it for me and then find me and tell me that you've read it.
That's right. Go do that. I will make it my goal to at least finish Gilded Cage by the end of the year.
Wow, that's a bit good. Then you
So
have to let me if you hate it, you can let me know too. I also
that
don't
that
mind if
that
people tell me they hate things.
that gives me like 6 months. So
Yeah, it's easy. It'll definitely at least um, be interesting to see how she plays with the genre, you know, because some of the characters are younger, some of them are older. There's a real mix of kind of personalities in it. And I think it's sort of, in my mind, it is sort of like a Game of Thrones or a Hunger Games or a Harry Potter, where I could see people reading it and be like, okay, which family would you belong to? Which level would you live in? You
mm-hmm.
know, without it actually being anything like actually like those. I mean that in the sense of like structure more than I mean
Right.
in the sense of literal parallels. 'Cause if it was exactly the same, I'd be so bored. You know, one
Oh
wants to
my
read
god.
something they've already, how many times can you read different incarnations of the same story?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes. This
All
is
right.
interesting. Yes,
So we definitely tackled Game of Thrones.
we did.
You told me about this book series.
Yes.
You're also part of a podcast called Footnoting History.
I am. We are now 6.5 years in. It's been we'll have our 200th episode this year, which is exciting.
Now,
And,
I
yeah,
do not know much about it
that's
besides the
okay.
name.
It's okay.
So, and I apologize because I tried to do my research,
Alright.
but yeah.
It's fine. I
So
don't mind. It's
so for the
you're
people
gonna
that
know
have
too much about us now.
not turned off our episode after the Game of Thrones and want to know about the podcast, what is the podcast and what do you do?
Yeah, so Footnoting History, like I said, we started in 2013, so it's been 6.5 years now, and there are 6 hosts, and we rotate who does the episode. So the good news about that is if you find one that you like, you can just wait for that person's episode to come out and only listen to them, and we will never know because it doesn't really sit there and tell us who listens to what. We just see the numbers that are general. Um, you can have your favorite host, you can have your least favorite host. It's all okay. Which I like about it is because since there are 6 of us, we all bring different, loves and expertise. We're all trained historians who seek to make history more interesting, which to us, it's interesting all the time because 'cause we're historians, but we parcel it down into episodes that usually average between, 15 and 25 minutes because we realize that not everybody has the time to listen to really long history episodes constantly. And we try and pick very specific topics that are things that when you listen to them, you might then want to share with somebody because you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that that happened. So I don't know. I did an episode a couple of years ago that was super popular because it was about the problems that Louis XIV, the Sun King, had with his teeth. Because it's like everybody thinks Louis the Sun King is like this big, bright, famous, glowing personality built Versailles, like whole big thing. It's like, right, but he had like no teeth by the time he was dying. And it was really gross. Or I've done ones on, this is usually a big one with American audiences, is I did one about what happened to the people who were loyal to Britain in the American Revolution after the American Revolution ended. Because so often you'll learn, like, oh, here's the winners, and we're going to follow them. But
Yep.
I was like, okay, let's follow who left. Where did they go? Some ended up in, the Caribbean. Some ended up in Africa. Some ended up in Canada. So we try to take popular ideas and look at them from a different angle to pull like the little interesting anecdotes out and then tease them out into an episode so that even though you might not leave it feeling like you know every single thing there is to know about Louis XIV, you might want to learn more about him, or if at the least you have a fun fact that you can share with somebody at like a dinner conversation or around the figurative water cooler. We really believe in making sure that the history that we share with people has been, well vetted, well researched. Each person does their own thing. So I might cover royalty a lot, but somebody else might cover cooking, you know? And we do episodes every other week, except for in June. So right now we're on hiatus, but we come back second week of July. I think it's second week. And then we'll be running again through next June, every other week. And it's fun. We like to keep them relatively short so that people, if they have a short commute, can get through it.
Hmm.
If they have a long commute, they can do more than one. Usually, if an episode's going to hit over a half hour, we'll split it into two parts so that it's easily digestible. And we have some good stuff coming out for the rest of this year that I'm probably not supposed to share yet because we recorded ahead of time. Unlike here, we're actually very scripted because quite honestly, if I didn't script myself on my history episodes, first of all, I would get dates wrong. I go through all of my episodes meticulously, highlighting the dates so that I make sure I get them all right. And I would go on tangents all the time about like, oh, so this reminds me of that television show where this happened. And nobody really needs to hear us do that in that context.
Right.
That's not what we're there for. We're there to kind of find those interesting things that you're like, I never knew that. Why didn't I know that? That's kind of cool. That's really
Are the episodes I guess because I'd like to find content for my kids who are
right.
going on like 11 and 10, and they've started getting into other podcasts that we listen to as a family.
Mm-hmm.
How family friendly are the episodes, give or take?
I know that there are episodes that are used in high school classes. I don't It depends on the topic because
Hmm.
we don't have sort of a limit on what can be discussed in an episode. So we do have episodes where things are not necessarily what you would want to expose a child to right away, but we're very upfront about it. Every episode that we do has a kind of blurb that will tell you what it's about. It's not going to be a long blurb, but you'll know kind of, this episode is going to be about something that's sexual. You
Hmm.
know, I wouldn't necessarily let a kid under the age of, say, 13 just kind of run rampant in it.
Right.
Just because, I can't tell a parent what they want their kid to hear at that age. That's a parent, knows more about what their child, I don't have children, so a parent would know better than I would know what's appropriate for their child, but we definitely don't filter. There,
Okay.
so there's no we don't go through it's not we don't curse or anything like that. There's nothing sordid in it from a personal sense. Like we're not being sordid in it, but some of the details of certain events are not going to necessarily be sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
so it's like, okay, what do you want the child to know about before they get exposed to it? Definitely, I would say high school and up is okay because, like I said, I know that we have many high schools who have told us that they use our episodes to kind of expand upon things that they learn in the class, or they'll
Okay.
use them for what's the word, extra credit sort of assignments, like listen to this podcast and then talk about it or whatever. But I would definitely my gut would be to say about 13 and older. I would think you could just let them look at it. But again, it really parents are also different.
They are.
What my parents exposed me to are totally different than what my friends' parents exposed them to. So it's really hard for me to give like a blanket.
Oh, that's totally understandable. I was just curious because
Yeah.
they've started listening to things where I'm like, oh, and just like
Yeah.
even certain TV shows, like they watch. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's like Untold Stories of the ER,
Oh
where they
yeah.
have dramatic events of like
Right.
things that happen in the emergency
Yeah,
room.
like, if they could listen to that or watch that, then they could, like, listen to my episode about the teeth of Louis XIV. It's we have episodes that are very family friendly, like, we have one that's the history of the chocolate chip cookie, so that's easy, but at the same time, you might not necessarily want a child to listen to an episode about I don't even know, I'm trying to think of one that's, like, really off, but none of them are some of them are just a little cerebral, the earlier ones, the newer ones are not. When we first started, we had to find our way.
Hmm.
But we have ones that go through like top 5 things you didn't know about Napoleon. Like that would probably be fine.
Okay.
You know, like I said, it's really anything that we say because our episodes are so short, everything that we say is said because it feeds into the story.
Hmm.
We did one that was really cool that was about the marriage between John Quincy Adams and his wife Louisa because prior to the current American First Lady, she was the only First Lady of the United States not born in the United States. So we did a thing on that. That would be kids could probably hear that one, but not. I think it's more about knowing the child and what they can handle because there
Right.
are a lot of sadnesses in these stories. Like people die, things don't always go great. A lot of history is unfair. It's being prepared, I guess, to have a conversation.
Right.
Like this is what this means to hear that, John Quincy Adams's son may have killed himself. Like it's something that's out there and it's known and it can be discussed. But if a child has not been exposed to that before, they're going to have questions.
Yep.
So it's if you're prepared to answer questions, I think it would be fine.
Okay. What are some of your episodes that you would point to for a new listener to be like, if you really want to get an encapsulated look on footnoting history, here's some of like the episodes that really just show off the podcast.
Let's see. I would say definitely the Louisa Adams episode, which we came out last year we released it on the date of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's wedding because it was our sort of answer to a transatlantic marriage because Louisa Adams was British born. So that one would be a big one. Um, we have one that is on what are their names? Edmondson. It's about an interview that my producer Elizabeth did that with a descendant of two enslaved girls who were part of an attempted escape and kind of what their lives were. It's Mary and something Edmondson. I don't know the name. I'm losing my mind. I apologize for the exact title of that one, but that's a more recent one too. Another very popular one is the one that our host Nathan did. That was the history of grades, which might be kind of cool. That's literally about how the modern grading system came about. Where did that come from? What does it mean? And let's see, what can we round it out with? There's an episode that Leslie did called Al Capone's and Al Capone and the Pineapple Primary, which was about how Al Capone attempted to influence an election in Chicago.
Hmm.
So there's a wide variety.
Okay.
Not everything we do is American. There's a lot of medieval stuff. If you're into literature, definitely look for my episode, Guy de Montfort and Dante's Inferno. It's literally about how a real life son of a noble English family ended up being written into Dante's Divine Comedy in one of the circles of hell. It's like, what did he do in his real life that got a contemporary to write him into a famous piece of literature? So it's stories like that they get me excited. It's dark, because you're not going to do something good and end up in a circle of hell.
Right.
But I think those are like probably some of our more popular ones that I see get a lot of traction when we post them, because I'll repost them on Twitter every once in a while to because you're always getting new people. You know that.
Yep.
You've got to remind people of ones that came from the past.
Exactly. It's always something where, it's just something when you see the stats and you're like, well, how did they come across that episode? Like, what interested in them in downloading an episode from 3 years ago? Or
Right? Exactly. That's exactly what it is. You sit there and you're like, okay. And it was Escape from Slavery: The Story of Mary and Emily Edmondson. I looked it up. That's the one about the two young passengers who attempted to escape slavery in the 1840s. I pulled it up, so I got the title right. Sorry, Liz. And my brain just blanked on what the name of the episode was. You would think, 200 episodes in, I don't always remember every exact title of them,
hmm
especially because they're not all mine. Like my episodes, I know all the titles of, but because we rotate, I have to then go and listen to other people's episodes. So it's like I'm a fan of my own podcast because I know the ones that I wrote. And I know what they're writing about, but I don't. So it's like a discovery for me too when I'm listening to it, which is kind of exciting because if it's not one of mine, I don't know their research, and we get to learn from each other that way, which I really enjoy. So
that
it's
is that is really cool, and I'm gonna have to check it out because I always loved history in high school and college. That was one of
fun.
my favorite things. It
Well, what's your
was
time period? What do you like?
I love. Okay, so I don't love like American history.
Me either.
I prefer I like Greek, Roman,
Right, right.
and then going up through like the early like British
Yeah,
and like Germanic tribes
right, right, right.
and all of that, and then I love like Native American history.
We had one actually, speaking of Native American history, where actually it was one from earlier this year, also by Elizabeth, that she did about American Indian prisoners of war. So that might be kind of up your alley. It's kind of about the ways that American Indians became prisoners of war in colonial America and like how they were treated and where they were sent, which was really cool. She did that one in January. That might be one for you. Yeah, I mean, I personally like. I went to my master's is actually in medieval English history,
Okay.
but I, from my own just love of it, really specialize in the Napoleonic period because I just love the early 19th century, the early 1800s, and I love biography, which also feeds into why I love people like the Lannisters or the darker characters because I always like to learn about why each person did the things that they did, and I love it even more when it's real people. So I get really into like, let me look at a specific person in my episodes instead of like a broader theme. But that's why we have multiple people doing this because other people prefer to do broader themes. So you can go through and decide kind of whose episodes sort of speak to your interests instead of it just being me droning on about person after person every week.
Exactly. That's always the thing is like, oh man, got to just change it up. Make sure it's not the same thing because
Right.
I can't do the same thing. I get bored doing the same thing. And that's one of the great things about having people come on and
Right. So it's
just
a different dynamic.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's always
totally
something.
get it. That's how it is with we don't a lot of our episodes, most of our episodes are solo episodes, but every once in a while we will do two people doing an episode together. and it just completely changes everything. Because it's like, "Oh, wow, you're not just doing this in a void anymore. There's actually a conversation happening." And you start to, really see kind of where everybody's interests intermingle, which is kinda cool. We should do that more often. I'm gonna make a mental note.
Mental notes.
So, there's always ways to improve.
Exactly. And like you said, where you were talking about how the podcast was finding its footing in the first year or
Yeah,
so, and it's
yeah.
like, and that happens because, like, I think you have the idea of what you want, and then it just changes over
Yeah,
time.
and we didn't know what we were doing when we started, in 2013. My friend Liz had the idea for the podcast in January. We launched, like, 4 weeks later. I don't ever recommend that. You should probably plan, but we were like, "That's what we're gonna do," and we did it, and we've never stopped. We changed, like I said, we changed the way that we air. We didn't really change anything in terms of the length of episodes or anything like that, though we are a little bit longer than we were when we started, but that's just because of the type of topics we've been doing. We used to have like 12 rotating hosts, which, as much as I love them all, was so hard to manage and just really hard for listeners to build up a relationship with. Because if you think about it, if you have 12 hosts and there's one episode a week, you're only hearing each host like once every couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
So then how are they gonna know who anybody is? Like, you want we have 6 now, so it's still not necessarily like you hear a person every day, but there is continuity because it's the 6 people we've all been around. You get used to us.
Yeah,
With 12, it's like I could barely keep track of who was going the next week, So we did change stuff because we had to learn, but it took probably about 2 years to really kind of get a groove, but now, I mean, we're coming up next year will be year 7. It's like, how did that happen? It's a lot of years, but I love it.
and
It's a thing.
that's a good thing. As long as you love it and everybody, keeps on trucking.
Yeah, I mean, you have to like it because, especially when you're recording by yourself, if you don't like what you're talking about, nobody's gonna wanna listen to you after the first 2 minutes. At least when you're talking to somebody else, you can, build and play off of each other. When it's just you by yourself, if you're talking about a topic that you don't care about, oof, that's really brutal. I don't think I could do that. So I will say one last thing, we are non-narrative, so that means that, like, you don't have to start with our first episode.
Mm-hmm.
You can pick and choose wherever you want, like, just scroll through wherever you listen to podcasts or our archive on our website and choose what you want. Because other than an episode that might be a part 1, part 2, there's no, like, we're not going chronologically for anything. There's no through line,
Right.
which is what we like to do because then it means people can we can reach anybody. People can choose what they like to hear, and that's what they're gonna listen to.
That's right.
You don't have to say, "Well, we only talk about, I don't know, the English Civil War," which is a great topic, but if every episode was about that, you would probably have to listen to them all in order or whatever, where we have more of like a menu where you can choose, kind of like you do. You could pick and choose your episodes based on what the person who's speaking is talking about.
That's right. I was told that somebody I recorded with said, not every episode is going to be for everybody,
Right.
but there's definitely going to be at least one episode that should be for everybody. There should be an episode that anybody can be like, oh, well, they're talking about like 2 of the things I like. Let me listen to that.
Right,
Or,
absolutely. That's what's so good. Like, when I first started listening, I scrolled through, it's like, "Who's gonna talk about something that I know about first?" Because I want to listen to it with the idea of these are things that I know and I understand. And then you go, "Oh, okay, but then they're also into this other thing that I don't know about, and now I'm gonna get interested in it."
hmm
It's like a gateway.
yes, I like being the gateway.
I think it's great exposing people to different things.
That's the goal. Now, for those people who have listened
And made
and
it
they're
this far.
here, we're here at the end. Where can people find you, and where can people find the podcast on the great thing that we call the internet?
Well, for the podcast, we are at footnotinghistory.com for our full website, or we are on Instagram with the username of Footnoting History, one as in one word. But on Twitter, Footnoting History was too long. So on Twitter, we are History Footnote, which is just kind of the only thing we could get to work. That kind of said what we were. But at History Footnote, myself personally, my website is ChristineCaccipuoti.com, and I am on both Twitter and Instagram as at my name is purpose, one word. It's an old reference to Avenue Q, the musical, which if anybody ever saw it and can tell me what that reference is, I'd probably stand up and clap because not many people know it. But, that's what it is. My name is purpose, one word.
Well, I saw Avenue Q, but I cannot pull the reference out of me right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So it's a very short reference where the two characters, Kate and Princeton, were dating, sort of, and they break up, and he tells her that it's because he has to find his purpose. And later on, she sees him with another woman, and her statement to him is basically, "Is her name Purpose? Like, is that who you found?" And so around the time when that show first came out, I was starting to join all these social media things. I was like, I'm going to say my name is Purpose. There's a riff on that, and it's stuck forever, and I love it.
That's awesome. I will have all the links to the podcast and to you personally on our show notes and Facebook page and website.
Hey.
But I just want to say thank you to you, Christine, for not only coming on, but for going way over the time, which is always fun because it means that we, especially with Game of Thrones. But please do not apologize.
Well, I talk a lot.
I love when people get passionate about what they get passionate about, and we have like a solid conversation. I think this may be, I can't be certain, but I think it may be probably the closest episode I may have on like a Game of Thrones like review of the last season. So it works.
Good. I'm glad. I was very excited to be here. I had a very good time. Sorry if I talk too much.
Oh, please do not
rambled.
apologize. I love it. And I do want to say, if you want to follow someone really cool on Twitter, Christine is a good person to do because
and I will talk
there's a lot of fun stuff there.
Thank you. I love following you too.
It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on tonight.
Thank you. I was glad to be here. I had a great time, and I can't wait to listen to your other episodes.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.